hi everyone, it's Mona here today, and I'm joined by Abhiir, who is a super inspirational youth environmentalist that I'm sure many of you have already heard of, either through the multiple news articles that he's been featured in, or in his recent collaboration with the BBC. And if I'm correct, you've also worked with multiple companies, such as the UN Environment Programme and the Delhi Metro Railway Corporation and WWF. So we're super excited to speak to you today, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Mona. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first question is, how did you become involved with the environment, and what kind of inspired you to become very active in it?
Well, so for me, it started out in grade 6 probably. I was the kid who didn't give a damn about the environment. I thought it's extremely boring. I thought, what's the stuff? Once in 3 or 4 weeks, we used to have these environmental awareness sessions in school, or maybe it was once in a fortnight. I'm not sure, but we had these once a month kind of interactions with um, this expert who would come in and talk to us about climate change and sustainability and basically environmental awareness. And I would do anything in my sort of capacity to jump out of those classes, whether it was faking a stomach upset or sort of bunking the class or something. And that was fairly uncharacteristic given that I was the teacher's pet and, enjoying, happy in all other classes. Um, but ironically enough, I guess things have changed a lot since then. In one of those sessions only, I think I got caught or something. I was skipping out on that class, and my class teacher caught me and sent me back into the class. And again, very uncharacteristic, given that I was the teacher's pet in all other classes. So she sent me back, and the lady, the presentation that day, the class was on air pollution. And around that time, I learned that air pollution was something which was affecting me and everyone else around me, in terms of our health. Um, so that's when sort of two and two came together, I guess, because I realized that, hey, air pollution is an important sort of issue that we need to deal with. And then I also understood that air pollution is part of a much larger problem, which is climate change. And so that's how it really started. And that was the sort of immediate cause. And then one thing led to another. I started to take up responsibility in my environment club in school, led a few projects, started a few campaigns. Then eventually I was leading the environment club in my school. Now I'm the deputy minister in my university for environment. And of course, more than all of these school and college related things, I've done a ton of stuff outside, on my own as an independent youth environmentalist. So yeah, I think it was just one step after the other, and that's how I got here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's, I think, very inspirational for a lot of people who are still at school and looking to get involved. And so you were mentioning air pollution, and if I'm correct, you're currently working for Care for Air. So could you describe a bit of the work that you're doing there?
Sure. So Care for Air is actually a non-profit. It's an NGO based in Delhi. But our focus of our work is pan-India, all across the country. And essentially, I'm leading a team. I'm heading operations and community engagement for them as a volunteer. So that essentially means that I have a team of 30 to 35, maybe 40 people, which I'm leading. And under that team, we have different departments. We have social media awareness, etc., etc. So pre-pandemic, we were doing a lot of groundwork. We were doing these cleanliness drives, awareness drives, plantation drives. Now, however, post-pandemic, these days, now it's restricted to the online medium. So what we're really doing is going to schools, colleges, corporates, retirement homes, residents associations, any sorts of institutions. And we're making presentations about air pollution. Because in my experience, there's two sides to the problem, right? The first is that people don't know about air pollution or they don't perceive it seriously enough. And the second is that even those who know about it don't know the right stuff about it. They're misinformed, or they have bits and pieces. So we try and put it together, telling them what the causes are, effects, solutions, what they can do, because there's no point talking about just the problem without addressing what individuals can do. So that's what we're doing at Care for Air. But individually, as an environmentalist, I've focused on air pollution even outside of Care for Air. I've written a few, well, I've not written, but I've researched for a few research papers on air pollution, which were then published as assisting a few researchers. And yeah, so air pollution and waste segregation, those are primarily the two areas where my work is focused on, uh, broadly under the ambit of climate change. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, living in London, I think air pollution is something that I notice a lot also, so definitely really important. And so on that, like sticking with air pollution, what are some of the policy developments that have like taken place in Delhi and in India at large to like lower air pollution?
So that's an interesting question because policy developments are plenty. Implementation and enforcement, on the other hand, is not at par with what's been implemented, with what's been sort of executed, so to say. Um, to give you an example, over the past 5 years, as far as I can remember, at least, I think, yeah, for the 5 years, the National Green Tribunal, which is basically our environment court, they have been banning firecrackers on this festival called Diwali, where there's a lot of these firecrackers and stuff which people burst, and they've been banned by the this environmental court. But each year that ban is sort of openly flouted. Um, Similarly, and last year I thought, oh, pandemic, people won't go crazy, etc. But again, if I'm not wrong, I think there were 12,000 complaints against people for
Wow.
bursting firecrackers, and those were the cases which were reported. you
Yeah,
know there were a lot more probably. So it's really about, I think, society, because the cops can't go and catch 12,000 people in one night. It's society which needs to sort of respect or adopt the laws or the recommendations that the government makes. So I think enforcement is poor in the case of some environmental policies, but it's also the fact that society also needs to sort of accept that, right?
yeah,
Individuals need to collectively show that they, through their actions, they need to show that this is something we care about. So yeah, I mean, broadly, I think that's how the scene is. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to dive into specifics if you want to ask something more about policy.
yeah. So, like you were saying, with the enforcement being kind of an issue, is that something that's similar for other environmental policies also in India, like not just to do with air pollution?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, it depends, because in the environment in itself is such a vast sort of domain. Another example which I can think of is that so often, they're cutting these trees down to build highways or to build,
Yeah.
I don't know what, sometimes for redevelopment projects, and they say that, oh, we'll, for every plant we cut, we'll
Hmm.
plant, sorry, every tree we cut, we'll plant two or three more. Or they say, we'll transplant this tree. um, but transplantation success rate, especially for trees which are very old, are less than or somewhere around 20%. You
Yeah.
know, and similarly, again, they may claim to be planting two more saplings for each tree cut. We don't know if that's happening, and if it is happening, are they even taking care of it?
Yeah.
Because a sapling needs some amount of care until it can sort of grow independently. So those are, of course, factors, in those kind of policies. But then again, some other policies have been fantastic. The UN that it made, that we'll do X, Y, Z. That we'll do X, Y, Z. India had made a commitment, I think, around 2014 or 2017, that we'll do X, Y, Z gigawatts of solar power. We far exceeded that, and now we've doubled that.
Yeah.
And at least pre-pandemic, we were on track to meet that target. and frankly, I don't have a reason to believe that, we won't achieve it even now. So in terms of solar energy, we're doing very well. So I think it's more of a case by case thing.
Yeah.
Um, but definitely miles to go and lots more needs to be done.
And so, how do you think the youth movement is kind of impacting both like the individual views on environmental policies, but also, I guess, like the developments themselves?
Well, I've always believed that, youth empowerment and climate action are two sides of the same coin.
Mhm.
Because the way I see it, people who are sitting in parliaments right now are unlikely to be in parliament 20 years from now, whether that's in India, whether that's at the UN, whether that's in England. That's broadly true for most policymakers, right? So, and the reality is that even though we are seeing the impacts of climate change right now, the more adverse ones will be seen 30 or 20 or 30 years, 3 or 4 decades from now, maybe 2 or 3 decades with the way we're going. So it's it'll be like my generation and generations after mine who will have to sort of deal with this crisis.
Yeah.
And we're dealing, then people our age who are sitting in parliament 20 years from now will be firefighting a crisis which has been years in the making.
Mhm.
So it's young people who sort of need to advocate and either have, at the very minimum, have a voice, a say in it, or they should directly be given a seat at the table, at least in this regard,
Yeah.
because it's only fair the way I see it. So yeah, youth movements are pretty important. To give you an example, a few years, no, not a few years, a few months ago, um, the government of India introduced something called the Environmental Impact Assessment Draft Bill, something like that, EIA, basically.
Mhm.
And this EIA was very sort of poorly received, and there were, students just purely through online campaigning, and of course, perhaps a few on ground campaigning. I know a few fellow environmentalists who were part of that. And surprisingly, the government sort of listened, or at least seemed to have listened. So they put that on hold as of now. So that just goes to show, that if enough young people come together on something that they care about, especially in a country such as India, where the vast majority of the population are young people, it can make a difference.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think a lot of young people are very interested in the environment, like you were saying, because it is going to be our like problem in the future. So what would you recommend for young people who are interested but maybe don't know where to start with like getting involved?
Well, the most important thing that I've been asked this question before a few times, and to me, what's most important is that if someone starts something, whether it's simply just, I don't know, planting 10 saplings a month in their neighborhood, whether it's a waste collection drive or a waste segregation drive, one of those things, even if it's a really small neighborhood kind of an initiative or a school level initiative, the most important in my mind is that they carry it, they see it through. It's not something they do for 3 or 4 or 5 months.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, nowadays, environmental and social initiatives are beginning to be leveraged for CVs, for
Yeah.
college applications, um, which I mean is not the best. But okay, if you're doing that, at least sort of have a succession plan in place. Hand it over to your juniors or carry it forward when you go to college. Have like at least a 7 month or a 1 year kind of a timeline for the projects, right? Just give me a second, one second. Yeah, sorry. Um, so a sort of have a timeline, have a plan in place to properly execute it. That's the most important. Because in my opinion, if someone wants to start something for 3 months, it may be good, but then in the larger scheme of things, it's better that you sort of do it if you're doing it just for 2 or 3 months. So that's the sort of blanket approach which I would say start with. Now, addressing how to get started, what should sort of, what's the best way to go about it. There's 2 or 3 things, right? The first thing is identify a cause that you're passionate about.
Mhm.
For me, it was air pollution, and then more recently, waste segregation. right? For some people, it could be water pollution. For some people, it could be, I don't know, helping the underprivileged with food. It doesn't have to be, directly environment related. So identifying a cause you're passionate about, because then the chances of your continuing with it and actually caring about it are higher. Second thing is that there seems to be this, um, I don't know what's the word. You may say trend, for everyone to start their own initiatives. I'm the founder of this. I'm the sort of CEO of this initiative or whatever. That's good. It's always good to be a social entrepreneur, but again, it depends on your goals, right? If someone is looking to just help out, it's perhaps a good idea to sort of reach out to an NGO and volunteer with them. Or if you have a friend of a friend who's running an initiative, reach out to them. Say, hey, I want to help you. How can I join the team? How can I get involved? So in fact, that should always be the first step. Don't start your own thing right away unless you have an immediate cause, action, and a plan. It's always good to sort of start, join a team, learn the ropes, and then start your own thing if you want to. And if you have the capacity to sort of go through with it. So that's what I would broadly say, because anything, whether it's social work, whether it's environmental work, which arguably, are very intersectional, um, it all comes down to passion and commitment, because it's so to say, thankless job. You're not getting paid for it. So when you're volunteering, you need to be sure that you are committed to it, you're passionate, and yeah, you really want to make a difference. And it's not something you're doing just to pad up your CV for college. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I would say.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. And definitely, if you're following your passion, so to say, then you're much more likely to stick with it.
Yeah.
And so, I guess switching themes a bit and going to something more like recently relevant, I saw on your collaboration with the BBC that you were talking about how air pollution in Delhi means that people have lower immune systems, and so it's more difficult for their systems to battle COVID, essentially. And I found this very interesting because, like, I think I wasn't really thinking that way, but like it really highlighted that link for me. So would you like mind
Sure.
elaborating on it a bit?
Sure, sure. I'm glad you actually went through and heard that interview. So essentially, this was, I don't know, I appeared on the BBC now 6, 7 months ago. But this was a sort of, you can say, research paper or a piece of data which I came across
Mm-hmm.
in prominent newspapers. I think it was in the BBC itself as well, by the way, in the print version. But it had got coverage in quite a few media publications. It was a study by Harvard and by Cambridge, I think. I'm not sure now. It's been a while since I came across that. But essentially, these were two studies, which I was citing in that interview. One of them said that the severity of COVID is much more when you get the disease if you have had prolonged exposure to air pollution,
Right.
right? And the second one, I think, was more of a statistic about, your rates of infection and survival, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
But the crux of the argument being that because, how should I say, because COVID sort of impacts your entire system, but also your lungs at times,
Yeah.
um, people who have had prolonged exposure to air pollution are susceptible in one way or the other. Whether the disease is more severe, whether its chance of getting it are more higher. Those that there are more studies being done on that, as a matter of fact. But what is established scientifically is that there is definitely a link between people who have been exposed to air pollution for prolonged periods and COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Manifestation may vary, but there is a link. So that was surprising. And if I may build on that, there was also an article in The Guardian a few months ago, which suggested, again, scientists are still exploring this, but this was scientific research which suggests that climate change may have played a role in, the emergence of the coronavirus pandemic.
Right.
And to simplify it very simply, to put it very simply, um, it's like, how do I explain? You have deforestation going on,
Mm-hmm.
which is part of the climate crisis. And by virtue of deforestation going on, all your sort of I don't know, bats, rats,
Mhm.
your stray dogs, all these, animals which both inhibit human areas as well as, wild areas. They are being forced out into rural areas or into urban areas slow and steady. And by virtue of that, the zoonotic barrier, the human animal barrier, is being reduced.
Mhm.
So, that's how human beings are coming into more contact with such viruses and so on and so forth. So that's also pretty interesting and worrying. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I definitely hadn't thought at all about it in that way, but it's very easy to box things into separate issues when they're all kind of interconnected. So I know you're currently doing your degree, and so where do you see yourself going forwards after you finish?
That's an interesting question because I'm not sure I have the answer myself. But currently, I'm studying political science and international relations. Also exploring a concentration in media studies, which was a sudden sort of surprise, but it's pretty interesting. Um, but yeah, I mean, those are my sort of academic pursuits. But my true interest lies in environmental conservation and related
Yeah.
fields. So this is probably just loud thinking, but I'm leaning towards perhaps exploring careers pertaining to the environment. So environmental management, sustainability. Um, I don't know. I've never studied the theoretical sort of academic side of environmental studies, but that's perhaps an option too. Otherwise, I have a keen interest in public policy and policy making, so maybe even environmental law.
Yeah.
So yeah, still figuring things out. My ultimate aspiration or desire is to be the Prime Minister of India. So
Wow.
let's see if that happens. Maybe start off as the Environment Minister and then sort of reach there. But yeah, that's an aspiration. First, I need to figure out my career path. Yeah.
No, that sounds very interesting, and I'll definitely be looking out on the news. And so to finish off is a bit of like a fun question, I guess. So lots of countries committed themselves to the zero net carbon, and I saw on an article that you said that India should focus on kind of more realistic goals, and that's a better way forward, if I'm correct. So
Sure.
where would I guess you personally like to see Delhi at the end of the decade, and how do you think, like, what are the steps to ensure that?
Yeah, so I think the interview you're referring to was basically another interview which I had given, where I was actually interacting with the number one sort of expert on all things environment in India, a lady called Miss Sunita Narayan, who heads India's oldest and foremost environmental think tank, Center for Science and Environment. And in my conversation with her, this was something I learned and sort of agree with, which is that I was discussing with her that the fact that the U.S. left the Paris Climate Agreement was surprising, but that obviously has to do with the president at the time. Um, but the French president, before the US sort of rejoined under Biden, the French president, Francois Hollande, the former French president, had tweeted saying that, this is sort of setting a dangerous precedent because,
Yeah,
it shows that you can just leave and come in and go as you will. So it's a bit tricky, and he had a valid point. But then what Sunita Narayan told me, which makes a lot of sense, was that, fine, that perhaps is a loophole, but at the same time, you have to see that Biden held a conference recently,
yeah,
a few months ago. Um, and what he did there showed that the US is willing to walk the talk
yeah,
on climate action rather than just sort of be the notional figurehead, or
yeah,
whatever you may call it. And what they did was, I think they committed to reducing coal emissions by 50% by 2030.
yeah,
And according to her, which now I completely sort of agree with, why that's phenomenal is because if you set a target for 2030, it's something where you have some idea. I mean, the pandemic has taught us that you never know what's coming, right? But even then, you have more of an idea of how things will look like by 2030 than how things will look like by 2050,
Yeah,
right? And right now, the UN's goals are more aligned towards 2050 targets. India has been criticized for not committing to a net zero thing,
yeah,
but after having that conversation, what makes sense to me is, hey, make smaller targets,
yeah,
ambitious yet small, but ones which you can, you have an eye at the end of the tunnel, you can see the prize, right? You can sort of work towards it. If you're working towards something which you want to achieve by 2050, you don't know what the technology will be like, you don't know what the situation will be like. Technology could have advanced by leaps and bounds,
yeah,
there could be different kinds of emissions by that point in time, who knows, you know so it's better to have relatively short term, ambitious but yet realistic targets. And that's what I feel should be the case for India too. As far as where I would like to see Delhi in 10 years from now, I think the most crucial thing Delhi, and by extension of that the entire country, needs is, we need a public transport system which is powered by clean energy. We
mhm,
need a public transport system which has the capacity to support a vast majority of the population, because that's not the case right now.
yeah,
And we need a lot more clean energy, electric vehicles, solar panels. Our wind power needs to be amped up big time. So those are things I think Delhi and India needs to work on. Delhi can't really do much on wind energy, but yeah, India can. So
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
That makes a lot of sense, the way you explained it with the realistic, the short-term ambitious goals.
yeah.
And I think that's it for today. So thank you so much. I really learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody else did too.
I hope so. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful interacting with you. Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.